All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are taking a deep dive into SpaceX's latest Starship test flight. You know, the one Elon Musk promised would be guaranteed entertainment.
Yeah.
Well, he definitely delivered on that one.
Absolutely.
We've got eyewitness accounts, official statements from SpaceX and the FAA, and a whole bunch of reports from various news outlets.
Right.
It's a pretty wild picture of what happened.
What makes this test flight so interesting is that it wasn't just about launching a rocket, it was a
Yeah.
crucial test for Starship.
Yeah.
This is a spacecraft that's going to completely change space travel as we know it.
Yeah, so for those of us who haven't been glued to every single SpaceX update, why is Starship such a big deal? What's the end game here?
Okay, so SpaceX's ultimate goal with Starship is to create a fully reusable spacecraft,
Okay.
and it'll be capable of carrying both cargo and eventually people
Wow.
to destinations like the moon, Mars, even beyond.
That's incredible.
Think about this. It's a 400-foot tall vehicle, and it's designed to be the most powerful rocket ever developed.
Wow.
So this test flight was all about pushing the limits of technology, seeing how these upgrades performed under real-world conditions,
Right.
and gathering data for future iterations.
So paint me a picture. The launch itself, what happened?
So the launch from Boca Chica, Texas,
Yeah.
it was initially a resounding success.
Okay.
Picture this. It's sunset, this massive rocket lifts off without a hitch.
Wow.
And ground control is erupting in cheers as the super heavy booster separates and comes back down to the launch pad.
That's awesome.
That, right there, is a key part of SpaceX's reusability strategy.
Yeah, that's amazing. But then things took a turn, right?
Yeah, about 9 minutes into the flight, they lost communication with Starship.
Oh, wow.
And reports started trickling in describing, a rapid unscheduled disassembly.
A rapid unscheduled disassembly.
Yeah.
Okay, so in plain English, that means Starship broke apart, right?
Pretty much,
Okay.
yeah. There were sightings of debris over the Gulf of Mexico.
Really?
And some reports even placed debris as far away as the Caribbean.
Wow. Okay, so that sounds pretty intense. And I heard the FAA even had to get involved.
Yeah.
Didn't they have to reroute air traffic because of the falling debris?
Exactly.
I mean, that's not something you hear every day.
Yeah, the FAA had to step in and temporarily slow down and even divert air traffic in the area just to make sure everything was safe.
Right.
And that just goes to show how impactful this event was
Yeah.
and how spaceflight can have a ripple effect on other industries like aviation.
It's true, yeah.
As space travel becomes more and more common, coordinating with air traffic control is going to be absolutely crucial.
Wow. It really puts things into perspective when you think about it. Pieces of a rocket falling from the sky.
It's a powerful image, and it goes to the heart of why spaceflight is so captivating,
Right.
It's cutting-edge technology. But there's also the sense of wonder
Yeah.
and, yeah, even a little bit of risk.
Speaking of wonder, have you heard about Holly Hackman in Turks and Caicos? She saw the debris and thought it was aliens. Can you imagine?
It's incredible. I love these stories, They spark the imagination, and they remind us that space exploration, for all its complexity,
Yeah.
it's about human experience as well.
Yeah.
Holly's story makes this event so much more personal and relatable.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even though these events are monumental, they still have a human impact. Okay, let's get back to the technical side for a second.
Sure.
Any ideas on what caused this, rapid unscheduled disassembly?
Rapid unscheduled disassembly, yeah. Well, Elon Musk himself hinted that it was probably a leak.
A leak.
Yeah, an oxygen fuel leak in a cavity above the engine firewall.
Oh, wow.
Apparently, the pressure built up and it just overwhelmed the venting system, and that's what led to the breakup.
So design flaw then.
Well, it's important to remember that SpaceX, they operate in a very iterative way.
Oh.
They're constantly testing things, pushing limits,
Right.
and they learn from both successes and failures.
Yeah, that's true. They've had their fair share of explosions and mishaps in the past, but they always seem to bounce back.
Exactly. This incident, while dramatic, it's probably just a bump in the road for them.
Okay, setbacks are to be expected. But what about SpaceX's bigger ambitions? Especially with NASA's Artemis program. I mean, it's supposed to be a big part of getting us back to the moon, right?
Right. NASA chose SpaceX's Starship to be the lunar lander for the Artemis III mission, which is currently scheduled for 2027. So this test flight, it definitely throws a wrench in things.
Yeah.
But it's really important to remember that this was just a test flight.
Okay.
And test flights are all about gathering information and finding areas that need improvement.
So you're saying this isn't necessarily a deal breaker for Artemis?
not at all. There's still a lot of time between now and 2027. Plenty of time for SpaceX to fix the problems that caused this.
Right.
And keep in mind, NASA isn't putting all their eggs in one basket. They're also working with other companies on different lunar lander designs.
That makes sense. So it sounds like the future of Artemis and maybe even deeper space exploration.
Yeah.
It hinges on Starship's success.
Hmm.
But this setback doesn't mean it's game over.
Exactly. This incident definitely raises the stakes. But it's also likely to make SpaceX even more determined to learn, adapt, and ultimately succeed.
Right.
This whole oxygen fuel leak issue.
Yeah.
It shows just how tricky it is to work with cryogenic propellants.
Cryogenic what?
Cryogenic propellants, like liquid oxygen and methane.
Oh, okay.
They have to be kept super cold, and even a tiny leak can cause dangerous pressure buildups.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that. So even a small leak could have huge consequences.
Absolutely, and it just highlights why spaceflight is such a difficult and complex thing.
Right.
But it also speaks to the amazing ingenuity and determination of the people working to solve these problems.
That's true. Okay, so we've talked about the launch, the rapid unscheduled disassembly, and the implications for Artemis. What happens now?
Well, I think SpaceX is going to be poring over every bit of data from this test flight, looking for what went wrong and how to stop it from happening again.
Yeah.
They'll be focusing on those sealing mechanisms.
Yeah.
And maybe even redesigning the venting system to handle all that pressure.
That makes sense. But beyond the technical stuff, I'm curious about the human element.
Okay.
How did the folks at SpaceX react to this?
Now that's where things get really interesting, and that's what we're going to dive into next.
Okay, so we've covered all the technical stuff about the rapid unscheduled disassembly. But what about the people at SpaceX, how they react to this whole thing?
Well, one thing we know about SpaceX's culture is that they really see failure as a chance to learn.
Yeah.
It's like a badge of honor for them,
Right.
a sign they're pushing the limits.
Yeah, it's totally different from how most companies, especially public ones, usually act.
Right.
They usually try to downplay failures.
For sure.
Or even hide them altogether.
Exactly. But SpaceX, they seem to have this move fast and break things mentality, which obviously comes with big risks when you're talking about spaceflight.
Yeah. And speaking of risks, what about Elon Musk's reaction? He's always active on social media.
He is.
And he definitely didn't shy away from this one.
No, not at all. He actually embraced it,
Yeah.
He even joked about the rapid unscheduled disassembly thing.
It's kind of like he expected it to happen. Like it was just part of the process.
It's almost like that, yeah.
You'd think after something like this, there'd be a lot of blame going around.
Yeah.
But instead, they're excited about what they learned.
That's the culture Musk has created at SpaceX. It's all about staying positive,
Okay.
focusing on solutions instead of problems, and believing that even big failures can teach us valuable lessons.
So for them, it's not just about the tech. It's about this whole mindset, this willingness to push the limits, even if it means things explode sometime.
Exactly, and it seems to be working for them. They've accomplished so much in such a short time.
Yeah, they've totally disrupted the space industry.
They have.
I guess when your goal is to make humanity multiplanetary, a few explosions are bound to happen, right?
It's like they're playing a whole different game compared to traditional aerospace companies. They're not just building rockets, they're trying to revolutionize space travel itself.
Okay, so SpaceX's approach might be different,
Yeah.
but let's go back to the Artemis program for a minute.
Sure.
How do you think this incident affects NASA's confidence in SpaceX?
That's a great question. Remember, NASA has a lot riding on SpaceX. They picked Starship to be the lunar lander for Artemis III,
Right.
which is supposed to land people on the moon in 2027. This definitely raises some concerns about whether Starship can meet those deadlines.
Yeah, and the safety requirements.
It does. It adds another layer of complexity.
Right.
But it's important to note that NASA knew the risks of working with SpaceX. They knew Starship was still being developed, that there would be setbacks.
So they weren't totally surprised by this.
Not really. NASA's always said that Artemis is designed to be flexible.
Okay.
They have backup plans, including working with other companies on different lunar landers.
So it's not all or nothing for Artemis.
Exactly. While this might cause some delays or changes to the timeline, it doesn't mean the mission is over.
That's good to hear. I bet the SpaceX engineers are already working hard, analyzing data from this flight
Yeah,
and figuring out how to make the design better.
I have no doubt. And actually, this incident might even speed up their progress in the long run.
Really? How so?
Well, sometimes failures are the best teachers. They make you question your assumptions,
Right.
find weak points, and come up with new solutions.
Okay.
This will definitely lead to improvements in Starship's design, make it stronger and more reliable.
So this could be a good thing for Artemis in the end.
It's definitely possible. Sometimes you need a little rapid, unscheduled disassembly to figure out how to do things better.
I like that way of looking at it. But let's talk about the bigger picture for space exploration in general.
Okay.
This whole thing has gotten a lot of attention, hasn't it?
It really has, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Why not? I mean, wouldn't something like this make people afraid of space travel? Make them question the whole idea?
Well, some people might react that way, sure. But for others, it can actually make them more curious, more excited about space.
Right.
It reminds them that space exploration is still a frontier.
Right.
There are still risks. And there's so much we don't know.
It's like watching a real-life space adventure.
Yeah.
With all the drama and suspense.
Exactly. And that can be really captivating.
Yeah.
It reminds us that incredible things are happening in space. Things that used to be science fiction.
Okay, so this could actually be good for raising awareness about space exploration.
It has the potential, yeah. That increased awareness could mean more support for space programs,
Okay.
more funding for research, and ultimately more progress in exploring the cosmos.
So even though the test flight didn't go to plan, it could still have a positive impact on space travel.
I think so. Sometimes it takes a dramatic event like this to capture people's imaginations and
Right.
remind us what's at stake.
This whole story really shows that space exploration isn't just about rockets and technology. It's about human ingenuity, resilience, and pushing our limits.
It's about the thrill of discovery, the mystery of the unknown, and striving for something bigger than ourselves.
Speaking of the human element, let's talk about Holly Hackman in Turks and Caicos again. Remember, she's the one who saw the debris and thought it was aliens.
Yes, it's such a great story. It shows how these events in space can have a real impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
And how they see the world.
I think it speaks to our fascination with space. Even though most of us will never actually go there, we're drawn to these stories, these glimpses into the vastness and mystery of the universe.
It reminds us that space exploration isn't just about data and technology. It's about human experience, wonder, and understanding our place in the cosmos.
It also shows how important it is to communicate science and technology to the public in a way that's engaging and relatable. Stories like Holly's encounter with the Starship debris can make people curious
Definitely.
and inspire them to learn more about space exploration.
Absolutely. We need more stories like that. Stories that connect the complexity of spaceflight with the human experience. Stories that capture the imagination and make people feel like they're part of this journey.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about the future. What lessons do you think SpaceX will take away from this? What changes might we see in the next Starship?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the SpaceX Starship test flight. It's been quite a ride so far.
It has.
We've seen everything from a perfect launch to, well, that dramatic, rapid, unscheduled disassembly.
Yeah, it really shows how unpredictable innovation can be, especially when you're dealing with something as complex as spaceflight.
It's funny, though, even with the explosion, there's still so much excitement around Starship.
I know, right?
It feels like this whole thing, as crazy as it was, it's only made people more interested in SpaceX.
I think you're right. There's just something about pushing the limits, about going into the unknown, that really captures our imagination.
And SpaceX, with their bold vision and their willingness to take risks, they've become the face of that exploration spirit.
They have.
Okay, so let's talk about those risks for a minute.
Sure.
This incident obviously raises some serious safety concerns,
Yeah, absolutely.
especially with the Artemis III mission coming up,
Yeah.
and NASA planning to use Starship as a lunar lander.
You're right. Safety is the top priority. And any incident like this has to be thoroughly investigated. We need to understand what happened and how to prevent it from happening again.
Right.
But we can't forget that spaceflight has always been inherently risky.
It's true, we tend to romanticize space travel, but we forget how challenging it really is.
Exactly. And SpaceX, with their approach of testing and pushing limits, they're operating at the edge of what's possible.
Right.
And that means there are going to be setbacks.
So how do we balance that need for progress with keeping things safe?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
It's a constant balancing act. And there's no simple answer. But I think it comes down to a few things: transparency, testing, and continuous learning.
Transparency,
Yep.
like openly sharing what they learn from these incidents.
Yeah, exactly. Not just with NASA and regulators, but with the public, too.
Right.
That builds trust and helps everyone learn from these experiences.
Okay, and rigorous testing, you mean like really pushing those systems to their limit?
Exactly. Making sure they've thought of every possible scenario. Things like simulations, ground tests, and uncrewed test flights like this one.
The more you test, the more you learn, and the better you can manage the risks.
Absolutely.
And what about that continuous learning you mentioned? What does that look like?
It means constantly looking at your processes, figuring out what can be improved, and using those lessons in future designs and missions. It also means creating a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up if they see a potential problem.
So embracing failure as a chance to grow, not as a sign of weakness?
Exactly. That kind of mindset is crucial for innovation, especially in a field as tough as spaceflight.
Okay, so let's say SpaceX takes all these lessons to heart. What changes might we actually see in the next Starship? What are the engineers working on right now?
Well, fixing that oxygen fuel leak is definitely top priority.
Yeah, makes sense.
They'll be looking at everything about how the propellant is stored and delivered, trying to improve those seals, and maybe even redesigning the venting system to handle more pressure.
They're probably also looking at the structure of the spacecraft itself, right?
Right. Trying to figure out why it broke apart the way it did. Absolutely, they'll be analyzing all the data, the debris patterns, the footage from the flight, to find the weak spots and figure out how to strengthen them.
So lots of number crunching and design changes happening behind the scenes. But what about how the public sees space travel? How will this incident affect that?
That's a good question. I think for some people, especially those who are already hesitant about space travel, this might make them even more worried about the risks. They might think we're just not ready to go beyond Earth, that it's too dangerous and expensive.
It's a valid point. Space travel isn't for everyone.
It's not.
But for other people, this incident might actually make them more determined.
More determined?
Yeah.
Interesting.
They might see it as a reminder that progress isn't always easy, that there will be setbacks, but the goal is worth it.
I see what you mean.
It really depends on how you view failure, right?
Yeah.
Do you give up, or do you see it as a step towards something better?
Exactly. And SpaceX, with their history of overcoming challenges, they really embody that idea of never giving up.
So what's next for SpaceX? What do they do now?
Well, I think they'll keep doing what they do best.
Okay.
Pushing boundaries and taking risks.
They'll learn from this incident, make the necessary improvements to Starship, and keep moving forward with their plans.
Exactly. And those plans include getting us back to the moon with Artemis, and maybe even taking us further.
And this incident, although it was a setback, it doesn't have to derail those plans.
It doesn't, yeah.
It might cause some delays, some changes to the timeline, but it might also make them even more determined to succeed.
I think that's a good point.
It's like now they have even more to prove.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how they adapt and overcome this challenge.
It will. This whole story reminds us that space exploration is a journey, not a destination. And even though there will be challenges along the way, it's a journey worth taking.
I couldn't agree more. It pushes us to our limits, challenges our assumptions, and ultimately helps us understand the universe and our place in it.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. If you were in charge of the Starship program, what would you do next? What lessons would you focus on?
It's a great question for everyone to think about. It makes you really consider the challenges of spaceflight.
It reminds us that the future of space exploration, it isn't just up to companies like SpaceX, it's up to all of us.
To be curious, to keep dreaming, and to support this incredible endeavor.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the SpaceX Starship test flight. We'll catch you next time.